Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Redberry Wheel here, and welcome back to another Civil Air Patrol video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about creating an advocacy paper, which is a persuasive speech that is trying to convince the audience of something that you want to accomplish, or for them to accept, or for them to think afterwards. So let's go ahead and talk about the different techniques that I have personally used with writing. I will also include a kind of like template of how you can put together a speech. It's not everything that you'll need to do, it's just to help with brainstorming. And look at the rubric afterwards just to make sure that we've got everything covered. So before we get started with everything, we need to know what we're going to be writing about. And there are a few techniques on figuring out what we should do. So if there is something in your squadron that you would like to see change with, that could be a good way to create a topic. Or if there's something that you are passionate about, that you have a lot of experience with, that could also be something that would be very useful. Something that I have seen with cadets is that they find an area that they're passionate about and that they're interested in researching more, and then that advocacy paper can be used to further their understanding of it, and they will present it to the unit. Now, in the advocacy paper, like speaking portion, it's recommended that it's not just presented to 2 to 3 people. It's recommended that it's presented to more people in the squadron so that people will have a chance to listen to such ideas and then possibly even implement changes within the unit. So, for example, when I was grading an advocacy paper recently, there was a cadet who was writing about the AEX award program, which is a great program that inspires squadrons to allow cadets to get involved with STEM, with internal and external work. And by discussing the importance of the Aerospace Education Excellence Award, that can further inspire the unit to get involved with the community, in addition to furthering the excellence of their aerospace education program. And the cadet created an advocacy paper and then presented it as a speech, and it was very effective in providing points, logical arguments, and all of this detailed information to convince the audience that, well, we should implement more with the unit in terms of the AEX, the Aerospace Education Excellence Award. The next thing that we would do is develop our arguments, or essentially the main points that we would like people to take away. So if, for example, I wanted to convince the audience that puppies are amazing, and my supporting arguments might be because they can be easily trained and because they are fluffy. Okay, so that would be our topic. The puppies are amazing, and then talking about those supporting arguments in that they are fluffy and they can be easily trained. Okay, so then when you are developing your paragraph, your introductory paragraph, what you would need to include at the end of it is called your thesis statement, which is just taking that topic and integrating those supporting arguments. So in my example, my thesis statement would be, puppies are amazing because they are easy to teach and train, in addition to being very fluffy. And that would be like at the end of the introductory paragraph. Additional information that you might want to include in it is background information on why is this topic being presented. And at the beginning of that paragraph, you should include something called the hook. And it's called a hook because it's like you're fishing with your audience, and then you hook them like a fish and you reel them into your speech or your essay. Okay, so a hook statement that I could do is, what would the world be like without dogs? With a rhetorical question, forcing the audience to be like, what would the world be like without dogs? And they might be more interested in finding out more information about what that essay is about. So to summarize, that introductory paragraph should start with that hook statement that really reels in the audience. It could be a rhetorical question. It could be a statement. It sounds like crazy cars outside my window. You done? People like to speed nearby, and it's very annoying. Are you done? Okay. So we start with that hook statement at the very beginning to reel in the audience, and then we might provide additional background information in 2 or 3 sentences. If you're doing some kind of scholarly paper, it's probably going to be much, much longer, but it also depends on what context it is. So with the advocacy paper, it would probably be 3 sentences maximum of just background information on like what puppies are. Or at least with my example, it would be on what puppies are and the reason why puppies are being discussed. Like, let's say my family might be trying to adopt a puppy. Then that might be included, like, puppies are available for adoption across the globe. And then continuing on. And then at the end of it, it will have that thesis statement with the topic, in addition to those supporting arguments. The advocacy paper should be 500 to 700 words, and it'll be about 2 pages single-spaced. So in this instance, you would probably do 3 body paragraphs. And for me, how I would do it is the first paragraph would be discussing that first supporting argument, the second one would be doing the second supporting argument, and then the third body paragraph would be to address counter arguments to my previous arguments. Okay? And then there would be a conclusion paragraph summarizing everything. So let's go into how we would structure presentation of points. There is a little acronym that I learned when I was in high school called AEC, or Assertion, Evidence, Commentary. And then whenever you are presenting some kind of point, you state it at the beginning. So remember with my example, I said puppies can be easily trained. So I would put that as my assertion. Evidence might be I pull a scholarly article on how Pavlov was able to train dogs to salivate whenever they heard a bell ring, using that conditioning technique, and by understanding classical conditioning and additional papers that were more recently published in order to have that credibility of recent sources, then we can understand that puppies are easily trained because their brains are under development and they can understand that a stimuli can be associated to a desired response, and they will provide that desired response when it is asked for. And the commentary would be expanding upon that. Why is it important that puppies can be easily trained? How does that evidence connect to that assertion? And going even deeper and explaining things. So whenever you are writing that paragraph, let's say you say that dogs can be easily trained, and then you cite the article that discusses Pavlov's classical conditioning research. So then you would say, in accordance to the National Journal of Science or American Science or something like that, dogs under this age can be trained faster than this dog age because of this, and then that would be your evidence. And then in the commentary, you would further discuss that importance of how training dogs early on can establish positive behaviors early on in their lives, and they won't have the chance to learn those negative behaviors like peeing in the house or tearing up legs of furniture. And so by establishing those standards early on, it's a lot easier to raise a puppy, and puppies are amazing because they can so easily learn these abilities in comparison to like a hamster or a mouse that doesn't have those mental capabilities, not nearly to the extent that dogs do. Okay, so that's assertion, evidence, commentary, AEC. And within your body paragraph, remember, the chunk that should have the most writing in it should be that commentary section where you're connecting that assertion to the you're connecting the assertion to the evidence and further expanding upon those ideas by presenting your argument. Okay, so that's what you would do with that first paragraph, and then at the end of it, you need something called a signpost or a transition sentence. And the reason for that is because if you do not have a transition sentence, it could be very difficult to follow the arguments. And if the reader is just reading through it and you just randomly jump to something else, they may not mentally follow on to that. So I will give you an example using my puppies are amazing example. So puppies can be easily trained. And in addition to this, they can provide a sensation that not all other creatures can provide. A warm, fuzzy friend. Or something like that, where it's just that they're fuzzy and they're awesome, which is my next. They're amazing because they're fuzzy. And by presenting that summary of that previous paragraph and then kind of moving into the next one, we can kind of be like, hey reader, nudge, 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 nudge. Hey, guess what? We're moving on to the next thing and I want you to follow with me. So come along. And then they should be able, and then they should be able to follow along relatively easily. If you're doing a speech and you do not have transition sentences, then people may just shut off and they may not listen anymore. So this is really an important point to keep in mind, and I see it missing from a lot of speeches that I have seen. Okay, so upon completing that paragraph where you've got assertion, evidence, commentary, transition point, or transition sentence, you got your second paragraph, which you do the assertion, evidence, commentary. And then you transition into the counter arguments. And with counter arguments, I acknowledge the other person's point or other points that might be available, and then try to convince people that my point is the one that people should be going for and supporting. So going back to my puppy example, some may say that puppies are not worth the effort because they can create a mess in one's home early on. However, they can learn relatively quickly because within the first 2 weeks of having a puppy, if they are trained correctly with the proper techniques, then they will learn those positive behaviors and they will not learn negative behaviors. So I first said some may say, or it is true that some may say this argument, and then stating, but here is additional information. And if you can cite sources that provide that support to a counter argument, or if you can if you can provide a citation for how you are fending off against counter arguments, that can increase your credibility as a writer, because by having additional resources outside of your own voice, then people will be like, oh yeah, so that science journal said that? Really? Okay, cool. And then having that citation in the document saying that it came from this source can further help the audience understand that it is a valid counterpoint, but your point is supported by additional information. So whenever you have counterpoints, in the advocacy paper it says to fend off 2. I recommend fending off 2 or 3, depending on what kind of counter arguments you can think about. So with the aerospace education example of a cadet that had presented the Aerospace Education Excellence Award, one argument might be that we do not have the senior member support to enable the squadron to do more external outreach to like local schools or anything like that. And then the counter argument might be, or like how to counter that in your own paper, might be to say cadets would be more actively involved and we would be more active in recruiting senior members from aerospace backgrounds like CFIs or educators that have worked in aerospace education to further strengthen the relationships between schools, and maybe even recruit teachers from elementary schools and educate them about the ACE program. And by having those senior members that are teachers supporting the program, or at least being aerospace education members, then we can further recruiting and retention in addition to spreading those STEM ideas. So that would be a way to fend off against those counter arguments. And then at the end of your counter arguments paragraph, how are you going to conclude things and transition into the conclusion? That's another thing to keep in mind. Just make sure you're using those signposts and those transition sentences. In the conclusion, you should restate your thesis, but not in the exact same words. Some people are guilty of copying that thesis statement and then pasting it at the very end. Don't do that. Please do not do that. So, remember, you do want to have topic sentences. So, in that topic sentence, you could say, in conclusion, puppies are fuzzy and can be taught relatively easily, and therefore they are amazing. Yes, you can do that. I do not recommend saying in conclusion, because it's just kind of one of those cliched sort of things to say. Just flat out say, puppies are fuzzy. They can be taught relatively easily, and thus, puppies are amazing. Right? So just by rephrasing things and kind of reorienting your language or using synonyms, that can provide and restate your thesis in other words to help your audience kind of retain that message. Okay? So in addition to that, you want to make sure that you are including sort of a summary of what you talked about. You don't want to restate your entire essay, but discuss those supporting arguments, rephrase them, maybe fend off a counter argument towards the end of it, and then you want to have something which is called a call to action. And in an advocacy paper, it's literally the whole point of your paper. What do you want people to do once they have finished listening or reading your speech? In my example, it might be that my family is going to go adopt a puppy. And so at the end, I might discuss adopting a puppy is one of the most straightforward, best decisions that can be made at this time to ensure that members of the family have a friend and companion when no one else may be home. It is a logical decision to bring in a pet, such as a puppy, because the puppy deserves a home and to increase the cohesion of the family in support of a tiny life form. I know that sounds kind of weird. I don't need a puppy right now, but I'm just trying to think of how you would put that call to action in my dog example. So that is all I'm going to discuss with the overall writing of it. So just remember, you start with your introduction, you got the hook, you've got background information, thesis statement, move on to paragraph. You've got your topic sentence or your assertion, evidence, commentary should be the bulk of it, and then your transition sentence. Move in, copy, paste should be the same process for your second body paragraph, and then the third body paragraph, you're addressing counter arguments. So you will address that counter argument, and then you will fend it off. And you will acknowledge it, but you won't accept it. And you want to ensure that people understand why your argument is the one that they should be in support of. And transition into the conclusion. The conclusion will have that summary of the thesis statement and summarize the arguments, the supporting arguments, maybe fend off a counter argument here or there. Not too long though. You don't want your conclusion to be too long. Just maybe one sentence for the acknowledging counterpoints, being like, nope, that's not all. And then call to action at the very end to say, this is what should be done. Overall, when you are writing, do not write in first person. In some contexts, you can. But when it comes to advocacy papers, if you say I or me, then that kind of reduces the credibility of it and kind of almost adds an emotional side or makes it seem like, hey, this is just what I think. So instead of, like, let me say an example of it. Instead of saying, I believe that we should get a dog because they are amazing, I would say, the family should consider obtaining a dog through adoption, as it is a positive effort that logically makes sense. And then I might further explain why it logically makes sense. Okay, just not including first person words increases the credibility, and it sounds a little bit more highly educated when you are writing in terms of your voice. So let's go into the rubric. I'm going to talk a little bit about the rubric and go point by point through it just to make sure that we are on the same page and that you understand what the expectations are. Okay, so here are the different items that it asks for. It says to include the title, author's name, and contact information. Typically, when you have an advocacy paper, you could do it in the header and use MLA heading formatting, where you put like name, grade, CAP, and the date in the proper way, and move on with your essay. I've personally used MLA more frequently for writing papers than other formats, and so if you are more comfortable with MLA, then I definitely recommend doing that. Okay, the next thing is it discusses having topic sentences for each paragraph. We went over that, so make sure you include topic sentences or presenting that argument or the assertion for each body paragraph that you are writing. The next part is saying that the paper is structured logically, so if it's in chronological order, or if it's in problem solution or thematic, whatever it may be, it should have some kind of structure to it that the readers can follow. So if you wanted to, you could do in an advocacy paper, this is the problem, this is the solution, and then counter arguments. That would make sense. And then how I did it was kind of like thematically taking that supporting argument and then discussing them individually in those body paragraphs. Speed round, the next part is content, which means you are explaining the subject matter accurately, comprehensively, and addressing all major facets, including contextual information, anticipating 2 objections, and demonstrating why they are ineffective. Argument appeals to reason, and it's logical, therefore it's backed by evidence, which may increase your credibility by including kind of scholarly articles and information. In addition to that, making sure that there are clear and specific measures of success. So if you are presenting a solution to a problem, then say like what kind of percentage people should be doing something, or including that kind of information to show that we can measure the success of this through this observation. And then the last point is that the person who is listening to the speech would be like, you know what, let's do it. Let's go. And then in terms of style, it's just grammar, not including jargon, and making sure that it's brief without additional words. So one way that to describe that, one way I've seen it is instead of just saying the word to or to, some people say in addition to. And that's adding in 2 additional words instead of just having 2. So, if that's the case, you could have in addition to maybe once or twice, but if it's repeated too many times, it can be repetitive and redundant. Though it could be used as some kind of parallelism in structure, it may not necessarily contribute to the effectiveness of the writing. Okay, so that about summarizes everything for the advocacy paper. If you do have questions for me, or if you would like any help with figuring out what you're doing, please feel free to email me or leave a comment down below. I do have the template that's included in the description that you can go ahead and download to use in terms of structuring your paper, and it's just kind of to provide guidance with those who don't really have experience with it. So I hope this video was helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and that is all, folks. Until next time, toodles.